And now, please welcome to the stage AAMI's Chief Learning and Development Officer, Robert Burrows.
All right, good morning. Welcome back to Exchange. I hope you all had a wonderful and productive first day. And before I get to the serious stuff, I'd like to ask, how many of you made it to the AAMI party last night? Yeah, there were about 300 there at least, and so what a great time. And I want to say now, and if you don't know what I mean when I say this, what a great sax player. And if you don't know, that's right, those of you that were there. If you don't know what I mean when I say what a great sax player, a little bit of advice: never leave an AAMI party early. All right, so we're in New Orleans next year, so we'll see you there, and I think we might fly the sax guy down there. It was amazing. So speaking of the AAMI party, sadly, we know that not everyone can make it to Exchange. They miss not only the AAMI party, but they miss the expo floor and all the great educational sessions that we have. So each year, we bring a bit of Exchange to the HTM community via our AAMI studio. With GE Healthcare's generous support, we do a daily live stream, including product demos from the expo floor, interviews with many of you, experts in the field, and we do a lot of additional interviews we make available through AAMI News. So be sure and come to LinkedIn, come to the YouTube channel, check us out. There's content going up there all the time. It's a big undertaking, and we absolutely could not do it without sponsor support. So I want to say a big thank you to GE Healthcare for that. All right, we have another incredible day planned today. Lots of great educational sessions and, of course, our expo from noon to 4. And remember, we're opening the expo floor up today for the kiddos. Happy Father's Day to all of you fathers out there. So remember, if you have a child 6 or older, or children, you can bring them to the expo floor. They must be accompanied by you. And you can get them a great, cool little wristband with either a full registration or an expo pass. Just stop by the registration desk to get them that cool I Am the Future of HTM wristband. So we're going to have some ice cream. We're going to have coloring books. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a perfect work day to me. So we will see you there on the expo floor. Thank you.
And now, please welcome to the stage AAMI Board Chair Janet Proust and AAMI Board Vice Chair for Sterilization, Ralph Basile.
Group of AAMI Foundation Award winners. We could not recognize so many incredible individuals without the support of you, our members and sponsors, and the donations of forward-thinking organizations. With that support, the AAMI Foundation elevates exceptional health technology professionals and researchers driving innovation. And today, we are proud to introduce you to the 2024 class of the AAMI Foundation Award recipients.
AAMI's most prestigious award is named after two pioneers in the field, Drs. Harold Loffman and Wilson Greatbatch. These highly regarded award honors are individuals, or can be individuals or a group, that have made a unique and significant contribution to the advancement of healthcare technology and systems or service, patient care, or patient safety.
The 2024 winner of the AAMI Foundation Loffman Greatbatch Award is Dr. Eamon Hoxie. Dr. Hoxie's storied career in HTM includes his work at the UK Department of Health, J&J, and his own firm, EV Hoxie Ltd. He also served on AAMI's board of directors and on standards development committees including ISO TC 198, ISO TC 210, and CEN TC 204. An emeritus AAMI member, Dr. Hoxie was designated a Fellow of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain in 2004. He received an AAMI Standards Developer Award in 2014 and the BSI Wolf-Berry Medal in 2016. For his significant contribution to international standards, he was named an AAMI Fellow in 2022. And now adds the AAMI Foundation's most prestigious award to this list of accomplishments. Congratulations, Dr. Hoxie.
In honor of John Hughes, the longtime AAMI member and leader, the AAMI Foundation and TriMedic's John D. Hughes Iconoclast Award recognizes an individual who pushes the boundary of HTM profession and demonstrates individual excellence, achievement, and leadership.
The winner of the John D. Hughes Iconoclast Award is 35-year healthcare industry veteran Blake Collins. Throughout his career, Collins has consistently implemented and advocated for industry standards and best practices. An AAMI member since 2005, he also demonstrated his dedication to standards by spearheading a 2018 initiative to get his HTM department ISO 9001 certified. The department was one of the first in-house HTM units to achieve this certification. Congratulations, Blake Collins.
This next award, honoring the late humanitarian Robert Morris, recognizes individuals or organizations whose humanitarian efforts have applied healthcare technology to improve global human conditions.
2024 recipient, Clement Nanayao Ajea Apia Enochi, has served as a clinical engineer in Ghana's North and South Bolsa districts, and as a senior clinical engineer and head of the clinical engineering department at the Upper East Regional Hospital. He is an active contributor to NGOs such as Mercy Ships, Operation Smile, and Ghana Medical Health, and prioritizes tasks that combine his love for education, technical skills, and a deep sense of care for those in need. Congratulations, Clement Apaya Anochi.
Unfortunately, although Clement desperately wanted to be with us due to some visa challenges, he was unable to be here in person, but he is here in spirit.
So congratulations to all of our AAMI Foundation Award winners. And we're not yet done yet. The AAMI Foundation mission is to support and enable accomplished professionals, and we also pave the way for future award winners. At a time when technology is changing rapidly and the workforce is aging, scholarship programs are vitally important to ensure the healthcare technology continues to be both safe and effective. So please join us in recognizing and congratulating the 2024 recipients of the following AAMI Foundation Scholarship.
The AAMI Foundation, in partnership with the Health Science Educators Association, awards one Health Systems Engineer Scholarship each year. Recipients of this prestigious scholarship have demonstrated an involvement in and commitment to the field of health systems engineering. This year, recognizing his work using simulation and additive manufacturing to enhance nursing training, the AAMI Foundation celebrates Stanford University PhD candidate Andrew Couch. Congratulations, Andrew. Created in 2009 in honor of past AAMI president Michael J. Miller, the AAMI Foundation's Michael J. Miller Scholarship Program provides financial support to students who are pursuing an education in healthcare technology. Every year, the AAMI Foundation awards scholarships to students aspiring to become biomedical equipment technicians, clinical engineers, and healthcare systems engineers. These scholarships expand access to students who have demonstrated academic excellence, technical aptitude, and commitment to healthcare technology and patient safety. Congratulations to this year's 15 recipients of the Miller Scholarship. Malia K. Daly, Oregon State University, with a keen interest in radiology. Maddox Natalia Corrine Falk, University of North Dakota, with a focus on biomedical engineering. Annie M. Zelaya, University of Texas at Arlington, with a focus on health IT. Megan A. Beebe, Beth Israel Leahy Health and the Yukon Clinical Engineering Program with a future in healthcare technology management. Juliana P. Conroy, Michigan Technological University, with an interest in prosthetic design. Keenan DePaz, University of California, Irvine, majoring in biomedical engineering. Mark A. DeGregorio, James Madison University, with a focus on mathematics and biomedical engineering. Eric Donovan, St. Clair College, looking to embrace a career in healthcare technology management. Anna N. Foster, University of Connecticut and Boston Children's Hospital, exploring the bridge between communication and clinical engineering. Kyra Hohenleitner, University of Connecticut and Massachusetts General Hospital, pursuing interest in clinical troubleshooting and project management. Mai Lee, Santa Ana College, completing a double major in civil and mechanical engineering. Nicholas Reynolds, St. Clair College, with an interest in combining biology and engineering. Gabrielle Rachel Rosales, University of Connecticut, Brigham and Women's Hospital, with a focus on clinical engineering research. Mary Ellen Takoti Ruth, the Catholic University of America, to pursue a master's degree in biomedical engineering while completing her medical school prerequisites. Lauren Williams, University of North Carolina at Charlotte, leveraging health IT knowledge with hopes to start an education foundation.
On behalf of the AAMI Foundation Board, our award co-sponsors, congratulations to all of our 2024 AAMI Foundation Award winners and scholarship recipients. These awards are made possible by the generous support of both individual and corporate donors, and we are grateful to all of you who have supported the foundation. And if any of you are interested in helping fund the future of HTM, please come to our AAMI booth. There's a foundation section, and we'll be happy to show you how you can accomplish that. Thank you so much.
And now, please welcome to the stage, AAMI board members Barrett Franklin, Mike Busticker, Diane Wurzberger, and Sherry Pardue, with special guests Ryan Bertram.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the keynote discussing the keynote specifically around the transitions of hospitals without walls. This will be a roundtable discussion that I will do my best to moderate. So my key job is to try to keep the speakers on time. So we'll go ahead and see how this goes. I'm joined on stage by three experts from the field to discuss the evolution and revolution of healthcare as we know it today. Currently, there is a huge transition as we see additional acute care transition from the hospital into the home setting. I'd like to introduce the speakers. Ryan Bertram is a partner with Chartis and a leader in its digital and technology transformation practice. In more than 15 years as a management consultant, Mr. Bertram has been privileged to serve many leading providers, solution vendors, and healthcare service organizations across the country as they navigate the changing healthcare environment, advising clients on topics such as enterprise strategy, digital transformation, organizational alignment, M&A, go-to-market, and commercial strategies. Please join me in welcoming Ryan Bertram. Mike Busdigger has over 40 years of experience in the healthcare technology management industry, is a member of the AAMI Board of Directors, and is currently the Senior Director of Healthcare Technology Management at Intermountain Health. He lives in Layton, Utah with his 5 children and 10 grandchildren, and is a proud handler of his certified medical service dog, Piper Joe, who joins him on stage today. Please join me in welcoming Mike. Cherie Perdue is an international technology executive and has led the information system teams in several healthcare organizations in the US and the Middle East. Her background as an engineer enabled her to progress through various technical and leadership roles, and is currently the Associate Vice President and ACIO of Clinical Technologies and Learning Services at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Please join me in welcoming Cherie. Diane Wurzberger is Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Quality and Global Regulatory Policy for GE Healthcare. She is currently an AAMI board member and holds a leadership position in both U.S. and global industry associations, including AdvaMed, COCIR, and DITA. Diane holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Biomedical Engineering from the University of Boston and a Juris Doctorate from Seton Hall Law School. Please join me in welcoming Diane. All right, so I'll go ahead and touch at least briefly on the definition that we'll be working on to give you all a little bit of a flavor of the conversation. So specifically, we're going to be focusing on home-based healthcare models as they complement the brick-and-mortar ecosystem. We're not just focusing on telehealth, but the entire breadth of technologies that cross into the home environment. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into our questions. So why should healthcare technology managers know more about home healthcare technologies? I'm going to ask this somewhat rapid fire. The intention is to give each of you about 2 minutes to be able to answer your thoughts as we start to go. Cherie, let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay, so the home health industry is growing. And so with the shift into this environment, based on the pilots and what we've done, there are different needs to satisfy that particular market with respects to HTM. You've got a mobile workforce versus staff being in a facility. It's a home versus a hospital, so that comes with certain nuances. And you've got patients and caregivers and family versus clinicians. And so that's a few things.
Thank you. Ryan, I'm going to go ahead and go to you next.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a bit more about this later, the broader trends in healthcare. But as more care gets pushed into the home, there is going to be a rapid proliferation of connected devices and wearables, which for healthcare technology managers is going to be critical when you're integrating all of this, and concerns around cybersecurity, as well as this new demands around supply chain and logistics management associated with that. So I think it's going to be of increasing importance that folks in this room really appreciate their evolving role as more care moves to the home.
Thank you. Diane?
I agree with everything that's been said thus far. I would just add, as that shift is happening from the hospital, the inpatient setting, to the home setting, it is around the logistics and how we're supporting the care that's going to be provided to patients at home. We have a number of stakeholders outside of the broader organization, if you look at the FDA as well, as recognize this need for a shift. COVID definitely was the impetus for that. I think we saw a lot of measures and flexibility taking place, and we'll see a lot more developing over time, including their own assessment and collaboration across all stakeholders, including the delivery, the support systems, the HTMs, et cetera, on how to do that in the best, most safe and effective way for patients.
Thank you. And Mike, rounding things out.
Certainly. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk a little bit about this, especially with the home health. And at Intermountain Health, we're seeing a growth in home health services of 10 to 12% per year. And as an organization that's extremely involved in home health, I actually have 9 FTEs that are fully dedicated to home health and the equipment that we're utilizing within those services. So we have about 25,000 pieces of equipment that are associated with home health that go out to our patients. And those require service and maintenance and just like standard medical equipment as well. We're also seeing an expansion into things. We're installing dialysis machines in patients' homes. We're putting ventilators in patients' homes. They're getting chemotherapy treatments at home. We're doing, they're moving to knee replacement, hip replacement surgeries as an outpatient. So patients are going in, having those done, then going home, and their physical therapy and everything is done in the home setting. So you're seeing all of that equipment transition into those areas. So from an HTM perspective, it really is a change for us from standard operations where we're doing PMs and our service in the hospitals and actually doing those out in the home environment now.
Thank you. So Ryan, we've cheated a little bit because I've queued you up for this next question. But as the consultant among us, can you put a little bit of insight into the maturity level of home health technologies and where we're headed?
Yeah, sure. And I wouldn't be a good consultant without bringing at least one slide, right? So as we think about the direction that the industry is moving here, it's not old school home health that was a very traditional care model, human mediated. We're talking about building an entire continuum of care that complements traditional bricks and mortar, right? And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One of which is just we have this aging population and healthcare is not getting cheaper, right? So right now the healthcare industry in the US is about $4.5 trillion of spend. CMS just had a report come out. They project that to grow to $7.7 trillion by 2032. So that represents about 20% of our GDP. That is not a sustainable way for our macro economy to work. So we fundamentally need to rethink how we deliver care at scale more efficiently and effectively. And these home-based care models present a way to do that. A McKinsey study had come out during COVID that estimated about $250, $260 billion of care could be brought into the home in today's dollars. So imagine with the broader growth of the industry overall, we're talking more than $500 billion of care potentially being delivered in the home. That is a very different business model, care model, different technology requirements underpinning those than what we have historically been used to in healthcare. And so, it's going to take all of us to get creative about how we do this in a secure and safe way at scale. If we think just about acute level care in the home, many of you may be aware that CMS had a waiver called the Acute Care at Home waiver that allowed organizations, hospitals that applied for this waiver to get reimbursed at parity with traditional inpatient care. As of right now, 330 hospitals have received that waiver out of about 5,000 nationally, right? So we're talking not very many hospitals are playing this game yet. That being said, over 80% of health system executives in a survey that we ran this year said they are either beginning down this journey of hospital at home and trying to figure out the role that the home plays as a site of care for their delivery networks, or it's on their plans for the coming 2 years or so. So this is getting the attention of the entire industry leadership. Change is coming, and it's not just health systems that are doing this. There are a lot of other market actors, from traditional home health companies to startups to big tech, and non-traditional players. Like, I don't know if you are aware, but organizations like Best Buy are acquiring monitoring companies and figuring out what role they can play in this new healthcare economy. So, it's exciting times in healthcare. It's really disruptive, but we're still very early innings.
Thank you. So I'm going to share a brief story about a situation that I actually dealt with my own family, talking a little bit about why this is going to make such a big impact. So almost exactly 2 years ago to the day, when I was getting ready to head to the AAMI conference, my grandmother was in the middle of actively passing. And so my family had made the decision to put her on home hospice. And for the first time, I was at my parents' house and seeing new medical technology actually being rolled into their home to try to ensure my grandmother's comfort during her final days. And as I went through that experience, knowing that I'm a healthcare technology manager by background and knowing that I know a lot more than most of the general public about home healthcare and the medical technologies that we used, I was impressed and candidly a little bit shocked and in a bit of awe as I realized what my parents were dealing with. So for the first time in their adult life, they were being asked to press buttons on an infusion pump. For the first time in their lives, they were being asked to be able to use SCD or devices to be able to make sure that my grandmother was having proper blood flow to her legs, and that they were bringing things like a hospital bed in to replace her bed in her room. And I think one of the pieces for me that had such a lasting impact was not only the fact that my grandmother's room was no longer looking like my grandmother's room, but was starting to look much more like a hospital room, but was also seeing candidly a bit of the fear in my family members' faces as they're being asked to take over the management of some of these pieces. Now, at the same time, we knew from a lot of conversations with my grandmother that that was her preference. She wanted to stay at home. She didn't want to go into the hospital. She was scared to go into the hospital from having been there when my grandfather had passed away, and it just wasn't what she wanted. And so in an effort to honor her wishes, we were bringing all these technologies in, and what I can tell you is that if we as healthcare technology managers aren't ready to be able to deal with patients and patients' families in a more direct way, it's going to have a very real impact. Because I can tell you the individual that brought the technology in when they sat down at the kitchen table with my mother and said, everything's going to be fine. The equipment is set up in such a way that there is nothing that you can do that will harm her. The only things that you can do is make this easier. Those kinds of conversations and those kinds of comments are not things that we as healthcare technology managers are routinely asked to do. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and lead from that into some of the conversations that really just talk about where this is going and what are some of the aspects that we think are going to have an impact. So I'm going to start, Diane and Mike, with you. I'm curious, what aspects or types of home healthcare technology do you believe will disrupt home healthcare as we know it today?
So I'll take a stab at that first. I think your example really is very informing to everyone. And the types of equipment that we've seen already to date in homes has varied. And it's been simple things like blood pressure monitors or hospital beds, right? Some infusion therapy devices. It's changing, and it's forcing the manufacturers to really consider, number one, how do we digitally enable our devices and ensure that the intended use of those devices are appropriate for a new use environment, which means a lot of things, right? How are we able to monitor those devices and collect the data, aggregate that data, and help the healthcare providers within the inpatient facilities who are really managing that care understand what's happening with those patients and have information of when that care needs to be adjusted, if there's a potential safety issue, or any other type of necessary action that's taken. In addition, I think we also need to figure out how do we aggregate that data on a more broader scale, monitoring that and pulling that together. So it's really, I think, that disruptive part will be that digital space and how we can support the care there.
Thank you.
And I think as we look at home health and we see technology advance and continue to advance, what we're seeing or what we're going to see is that patients are going to be, they're going to start being diagnosed at home and not in the acute care setting or even in an outpatient setting. So that diagnosis through wearable devices and other things are going to diagnose what's going on with that patient. They're going to be treated and they're going to be monitored at home instead of coming into that acute care setting. And as that technology continues to advance and develop, as HTM, we've got to look at it and say, okay, we need to be involved in the operational training piece. When we go into those patients' homes, like now when we have dialysis machines that are in those patients' homes, our technicians are going in there and they're looking at that equipment, and while they're there, there's not a clinician there with them, so those patients and their family members are going to be asking them questions about the operational piece of that equipment. So they're going to need to be ready to answer those questions and deal with those types of situations. And as we continue to see things progress and we look at artificial intelligence and the information gathering that's going to be done through these devices, you're also going to see robotics. We're already seeing some of that in the hospital setting, and I think you're going to see that in the home setting as well, where robotics are going to be involved in medication administration, patient care and treatment. So who's going to take care of that information? And then the patients are going to need to or want to have access to their medical records. And if they travel out somewhere or going somewhere, they're going to want to have that data and information with them in case they need some sort of a treatment in an area that they're away from home, maybe on vacation or some of those areas. So I think with that technology advancement and the development, we really need to be prepared and get ourselves set up for AI and generative AI because it's the future. And it is going to impact healthcare tremendously, especially in the home setting.
Thank you. So Cherie and Ryan, I'm going to pose this one to the two of you. So what do you see as the biggest challenge or risk associated with home health care? Cherie, why don't you start first?
Yeah, so I'll start, and I'm going to start by giving a specific example of what we've done at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And so we started in the area with respects to home patient management versus patient monitoring. And I think that's a progression that if you can start with the management aspects, it helps your organization work through some of the cultural changes that are going to be necessary. So a specific example was we decided that some of our trach and ventilator patients that were actively weaning, we wanted to really build a patient room for them in their home. So we have over 10 devices hooked up. But if you think about the logistics of that for the HTM, our HTM team, you really need to think about the modems, the connectivity that you're going to need, the internet connections that are in the home. How do you manage the cables because homes are not set up for cable management? What power is available in the home? The portals, so each of your vendors, if you look at all of the equipment that are needed for those patients, most vendors have different portals and cloud environments that are necessary. So really thinking about the integration of all that is important. That cohort of patients, the other thing that we really thought through was the radius from within the central location and what does that look like. So we picked a 75-mile radius. We started out with 4 patients in our pilot, and that was 2 years ago. We actually built that up to 55 patients that we were actually actively monitoring or managing at home. And then we've come back down from that a little bit again to around about 29 today as I'm sitting here talking. But the problem that we also had that we were solving was our respiratory therapists were there in the home for over 4 hours per visit. And if you think about that visit, they were then documenting manually. If you don't have the integration, they're manually documenting over 160 elements from those ventilators and transcribing those. The other thing that we used was our video visits. And a lot of the time on the video visits without this live connection was really scrolling through the ventilator settings to make sure that the clinicians could look at all of those versus kind of the real-time connection that we now have. So that the video visits are really now actually looking at the patient versus looking at all the monitor settings. And the other problem that we're having to solve is all the staff shortages. And this is where us as HTM people, we can help augment some of the challenges that we've got in some of our other clinical areas with the staff shortages. The other thing I wanted to mention is just think about your patient cohorts. So even in those that patient population, we broke that into acuity levels, and we had 3 groups of acuity. And think also about the teaming that you need to do with your clinical care teams. One of the other things that we learned is because we have very sick patients, we have multiple care teams taking care of that population of patients. And that's great until you put them in the home setting, and then you've got all these care teams contacting the patients from different aspects, not realizing maybe what one other team is doing. So thinking through the cultural change that you have to put in place for your institution when these patients go home, and the coordination of contacting the care team at home, which is really the families, as was mentioned, and thinking about the impact of all these multiple contacts what clinicians have with those families and the confusion that that causes. And so really thinking through who's communicating with the families, what does that look like? And then HTM coordinating with that, because the HTM group was fairly mobile. They're the ones that are going out, as was previously mentioned, to actually service the devices. So what interaction does that mean for your HTM, our HTM people to say, okay, what are we communicating to the parents and families? How are we communicating to our patients? So really thinking through all of those, and then just the education component for the families.
Yeah, I'll boil it down to three considerations here. One is around the culture and change management, absolutely. This is not the same as just copying and pasting what you're doing in the four walls of a hospital, right? The cool thing about this is you get to design the clinical care model from scratch around the patient, right? You don't have to be weighed down by this is how we always did it in the hospital and take some of those bad practices from before and perpetuate them. But it's flexing a very different muscle, right? So in order to drive cultural change, you need to have basically ground warfare of communications and stakeholder engagement to help bring folks along in this, right? The second big challenge that we'll need to overcome just as an industry is the supply chain management and last mile delivery is a competency that most provider organizations haven't historically had to do. We got really good at it within a hospital, but now imagine, a 500 square mile radius or catchment area that you now need to provide that same level of care because patient safety always has to come first. And so I think that the technologies are beginning to get more sophisticated, but we're still relying a lot on some human-mediated processes here that we'll continue to kind of work through as we evolve and innovate. Third issue is around reimbursement, right? The CMS waiver for hospital at home initiated during COVID in late 2020, got extended for 2 years after the PHE ended, so it's set to sunset the end of 2024 this year. There's been some legislation that was put forth that got through the House Ways and Means Committee to extend it another 5 years. But this uncertainty of reimbursement has made some more conservative healthcare leaders kind of wait and see what happens with the regulatory and reimbursement environment. So I'm cautiously optimistic we're going in the right direction. But without an economic schema to justify the business case for this, it's going to, definitely delay adoption from the broader industry. So I'm cautiously optimistic because of the numbers you see on the screen. I just don't know how our healthcare industry can take care of the population at scale efficiently without these types of solutions. But it's going to be an evolution in partnership with payers and the regulators, et cetera, to get there.
Thank you both.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Please.
So just to let you guys know, we're actually breaking even on our initiatives because we changed our payment model. And so what we did is we're actually subsidizing the clinical time. So we actually do not charge for respiratory therapists or anything. We don't charge for those visits. What we're actually doing is subsidizing it with their reimbursement on the equipment rentals. So you really need to think through how you actually make the money to accomplish, the care at home.
So for clarity, so you've almost turned it into a pay-for-service. you're bringing in the ventilator or the medical device, and
Yep,
by purchasing that medical device, you're purchasing the care that comes with it.
yep.
Awesome, thank you. So Diane, I'm going to throw the next one towards you, as it's specifically around manufacturing. So how do you see the evolution or even the revolution into healthcare technology and home health impacting the strategy as it relates to manufacturers?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question. And obviously, I think as we were talking about this change that's driven by the change in the demographics and the cost of healthcare, we have been watching this trend and looking at our own strategy for our technologies and how we can help better support patient care. So, as you all know, medical devices are regulated by the FDA. What that means is our approvals and our clearances are based upon intended use of those devices. That includes use environment. So it's one consideration we have as we're looking at our technologies that may support patient care in the various configurations that have been talked about here as an example, and whether or not what do we have to do to those devices to accommodate that, to facilitate that care. So that could mean a design change. It could mean a change in our clinical trials if we need data to show this population in this new environment of use. It's certainly a change in our labeling. So how are we supporting the patients and the families of those patients, and how the devices are to be used? How simple can we make that for them so they avoid any problems with the use of those devices? And then also, how are we planning and looking ahead for support and maintenance of those things? So maybe it's additional remote type of capabilities that are built into those systems. And then once it's gone through the regulatory pathway and that assessment, and it is good news that the FDA, as I mentioned earlier, has already started thinking about this as the next horizon for them, and how they will play a role in this home care solution, in that hub that they're creating, that collaboration. I think we'll have a voice at the table to talk about how do we ensure their process that impacts this is as simple as possible, certainly ensuring safety and effectiveness of those devices in this new environment of use, but that it's something that is done in a most, at least burdensome way, I should say, in the most expedited way, so we can support that care. And then just one more point to add on the digital aspects of this. I think that's huge. It's the AI-enabled applications. It's being able to monitor the data, to collect that data and aggregate it, and ensure that there's a connection between the healthcare systems and the EMRs and the command center, if you will, that's deployed in those hospitals, so that there's an ability to watch those patients and to monitor them effectively and use that data most effectively.
Thank you. And so Ryan, you've already started to touch on this at least a little bit, but I'm curious if you could speak to a little bit about how you anticipate that this is going to impact strategy for healthcare delivery.
Yeah, I had mentioned earlier, the executive suites at health systems across the country are grappling with what role will the home play as a site of care in the future delivery network, right? Some organizations have started by going after hospital at home first because there is offsetting reimbursement. Others, with that uncertainty, are looking for other use cases in the home that might not be as intense from a resource needs standpoint. So things like care after discharge and monitoring to avoid readmissions and things like that, or chronic disease management for Medicare Advantage populations. But long term, I anticipate a lot of organizations are going to move towards thinking of the home as just another site of care across the entire continuum, right? And that graphic that you had earlier that showed a 2x2 matrix that had the level of acuity on one axis and the, I forget what the other axis is, but effectively it's filling in gaps of care across the entire continuum, right, in a complementary way at home. So I do think that's the direction that healthcare is going. The challenge is a lot of organizations are used to owning everything, right? You can't do this without partners. There are few health systems that have all of the clinical and ancillary and courier services that are going to be required. And so we're starting to see new partnerships form as a result of that, right? So I think that's another trend that we'll see is how you structure this clinical operating model in a way that you still control the safety and effectiveness of clinical care, but you rely on partners to help deliver it in some way. So,
Well, and I can certainly vouch for your comment about the C-suites grappling with how this will look. I mean, I have had many conversations with other senior leaders in my healthcare system, specifically trying to say, is this ready? Are we ready? Who's going to own what, right? Because those questions from an organization where you're used to owning everything and having a really pretty tight grasp on those components, it's difficult to be able to sort of loosen that grip and be willing to let other people take a much more onerous role in that care.
yeah, and just one final point here. The resource and time required to stand these programs up is not insignificant. $5 to $10 million of startup investment until you get to a scale that's economically sustainable, right? Which means this is not a pilot. You cannot do this off the side of your desk. The organization needs to prioritize this as a strategic pillar, right? Leadership needs to be aligned around it so that when issues arise that only a senior leader can resolve, they have that grit to do so. And so, organizations need to dive in and have a demonstration project to prove that it works and then push to scale, because scale is the only way that this will be a viable and sustainable business model.
Thank you. So Diane, at the risk, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball that you started to touch on, but I'm hoping you might elaborate on a little bit. So recognizing that we have AAMI membership from all over the globe, do you see the regulators ready internationally to be able to handle it the same way that you reflected on the FDA starting to take some of those steps?
Honestly, I think that I don't know that there's a choice. I think that the pressures in the healthcare system, the costs that are rising, the incidence of chronic conditions is raising all over the world. So I do think that it may not be the equivalent of our FDA that's looking at an overall ecosystem, if you will, of what this means for healthcare in their respective jurisdictions, but some agency there is absolutely looking at this. FDA has been a leader in many, many fronts on medical device regulation, pharmaceutical regulation, biologics, you name it. I would expect that they will step up, as they have already announced here, to work collaboratively across stakeholders to figure out what is a good model and how to further this for patient care. Given their engagement on the international front in what's known as the International Regulators, Medical Device Regulators Forum, IMDRF, they have worked very collaboratively with a number of global partners on their management committee there to harmonize already on regulatory processes. This absolutely could take that next step there to then, if a process is implemented here, that those 10 regulators and countless affiliate regulators across the globe will look to that as a model, and then they will figure out how to implement a more flexible process to provide and bring products to the market, to solutions to the market for patient care that will enable those models that we've talked about here.
Thank you. So Cherie and Mike, I'm hoping that I can get each of you to answer one final question before we open it up for some questions from the audience. So what role or opportunities do you see for healthcare technology managers specifically to play in the evolving home healthcare technology space? So Mike, why don't we start with you?
Certainly. So, and as I listened to some of the other panelists talk, and as we look at from a home health perspective, scalability is extremely important here. So at Intermountain Health, and I would invite you, if you got other questions or you want to talk to me about our operation at Intermountain Health, but we have our own. There's a warehouse that we've got that's completely separate from the acute care operations, and we've got full courier services. We've got materials management there with med supplies. We've got a pharmacy in there. We've got just so many different operations within that warehouse in itself that's dedicated completely to home health. And like I said, I've got 9 FTEs that are fully dedicated to that. And of course, we started off with simple things like O2 concentrators and CPAP machines and things along those lines, and it progressed into the higher acuity devices that we're going out there with now. So from an HTM perspective, we started taking a look at it and said, what is our risk that's associated with installing a dialysis machine in a patient's home? And looking at what type of water quality do you have? What is the power? What happens if they lose power? in the middle of that treatment, and with the number of devices that are in there. So from an HTM perspective, I would say this is not something that you're going to be able to do all on your own. Your healthcare system's not going to be, or your facility's not going to be able to do it all on their own. It's going to require tremendous collaboration, more so than I think we've seen in the past, with organizations like our manufacturers, as we continue to progress down that road, with our IT departments to look at the data transmission and data storage, facilities management, the HTM department. We've got, you're going to have technicians that are going out, and when they go into these homes, what about the soft skills that are required? Where the old joke is that an introverted engineer looks at their own shoes when they speak to you, and an extroverted one looks at your shoes when they speak to you. Well, now they're going to have to be face-to-face with those patients and family members, and going into situations that they've never had to encounter before. So that is a great opportunity, and I think from an HTM perspective, get ahead of it. Start researching from a home health perspective. What are the current regulatory and standards that are associated with home health? What's it going to require from a manufacturer standpoint? And really start reaching out, get ahead of it, become informed. And I think, and I've said this many times before, 40 years ago, the HTM department was the fix-it shop in the basement next to the morgue. And that's not the case anymore. We are part of the healthcare solution now, and part of healthcare reform, and we need to be at the table and not inviting ourselves, but our administration, our C-suites, they need to be inviting us to the table, so you need to position yourself to where they are inviting you to the table to be part of that solution going forward and setting this whole thing up and getting it going. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was going to say some of the same things. And so as the leader over HTM, one of my big goals is to really elevate the role because I think the time is right. We are a critical element of the whole healthcare solution now, especially when you break down the walls. And it's going to be different. And so making sure that we're part of the design of some of these things is critical. I think it goes back to the theme, too, of what Exchange is all about, connections, and making sure that there's a clear partnership between yourselves and your CMIO or your CNIO, and making sure that they understand the value and bring you as a partner to any of those discussions, because you're really going to be the support for these types of initiatives moving forward. So I see those partnerships as absolutely critical. We mentioned standards. I think as AAMI members, we are also in a unique role to take a lead on helping guide some of the standards that are going to be required. We've struggled a little bit with once you get multiple vendors and you're talking about different communications, and then you add cybersecurity in there. Getting all the vendors to work together, along with us being able to support that, is absolutely critical. And the more we can kind of standardize that a little bit, it will really, really help. So I think that's pretty much covered it from my perspective too. But really, just start thinking about partnerships, and then getting yourselves into those key decisions when they're being made versus having to react.
So Cherie, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on a portion of that because we have a little bit of time. So specifically, this is an area where HTM is going to be increasingly working with IT. As Diana had mentioned, the transition of that information and the transfer of that data is going to be so critical. Mm-hmm. How do you see that relationship sort of continuing to evolve as we move into the home?
So at my organization, what we have done, and so what I'm responsible for, is I'm responsible for all of the clinical technologies. That's not just HTM, but I'm responsible for Epic and our EMR. I'm responsible for any of the applications associated with that. I'm responsible for any of the data going into and out of our clinical systems. And so working together as one, we have really found there's a lot of synergies by pulling all of the clinical technologies together across the board. and creating a governance structure associated with those, which includes HTM in there, so that it's much more seamless to the clinical teams. Like, oh yeah, this is one solution. We don't have decisions being made for biomedical engineering over here, and then other applications being made over here. It's all now one governance, and we've elevated that governance to a higher level in the leadership group.
Can I, and Barrett, I'd like to add just a little bit as well.
Please.
And I think that, it's time to stop. That's not our job.
Yep.
And that's their job, and our responsibility ends at the wall. And it's time to stop all that, and because we're all on the same team, and the most important thing in the end is the patient.
Yep.
And we may take some of the things that we've learned from telemedicine and telehealth, because I think a lot of it from the home care setting is going to be real-time data transfer.
It is.
Because you're going to have clinicians that are going to be looking at this data and information, and decisions will need to be made not an hour from now or 3 hours from now, but immediately. So real-time data transfer and monitoring is going to be important, and I think we've done some of that in other aspects, and we can learn from that as we go forward.
Thank you. So with some degree of intent, we have left some time for some questions. And what I would ask specifically is that if you have questions that are sort of unique to your organization or unique to your specific instance, the panel members are going to be here for a few minutes after, and we'll be more than happy to speak to those. But if you have a generalized question that you think would benefit the room, I would invite you to go ahead. We've got a couple of microphones around the room to be able to answer some questions. Even with the lights coming at me, I can see we've got a couple people moving to the microphones.
We've got another one up here in the front.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm going to take my name badge off because this is about my first 25 years in this industry. I started in home health. I used home health to pay my way to college and develop my career. Now, if we go back in time, home health, if we want to talk about reimbursements, we delivered oxygen to the patients' homes. Medicare reimbursement back in 1984 was $355 a month.
Yep.
By the time I got done in 2010, reimbursement was cut to $72. When we're looking at the home health environment compared to the hospital environment, the pay structure is totally different. Home health has always been viewed as a cost avoidance for the main hospital. If we can get those patients out of the hospital, we can save some dollars there and refocus that over to the home health piece. So I'm curious to, as we're seeing these fee structures here, I just don't see, there's not this magical bucket of money that's out there. We're talking about Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement procedures, and they're very slow, very low. When we're talking about maintenance of these devices, there has already been an industry of our home health care professionals that have been delivering the equipment, as you had mentioned. That was my role. Also servicing the equipment. These are folks that were making $6, $7, $8 an hour. So there is already a whole home health care industry that is taking care of this and has been doing that for significant years. So from an HT perspective, I'm not seeing us going to work on concentrators, suction machines, home vents. There's already a whole industry that's taking care of that. Now, I will say, where we have the opportunity is when we're looking at the telehealth piece, the component pieces where we're having it, health at home and getting that information over to the hospital. That's where our HTM mindset should be, and try to utilize that technology. Let the home health professionals, they know what they're doing. They take care of the beds, they take care of the concentrators. But when we're looking at that higher level of acuity, that's where we should be looking and focusing on. And then from a regulatory piece, again, we got to be respectful of our barriers. Joint Commission has their oversee over the hospital. There's a home health version of Joint Commission that takes care of that, just like as CHAPS. So we have to make sure that we're working within the regions and the borders that we have.
So I think there's a lot of pieces to that. Let me try to parse a couple pieces so that we could perhaps respond, and a couple of the panel members could respond. So I think one of the pieces, and if I hearken back to that first slide that we had put up, that was what we're looking at is not going to be just the concentrators. We're actually specifically talking about where you're bringing a higher degree of technology into the home. But I'm going to go ahead and, Ryan, I'm curious to start with you at the strategic level. to talk a little bit about that. And then Cherie, I'd welcome your sort of feedback in terms of some of the implementation level that you're already experiencing and how you're addressing some of those pieces.
Yeah, so as we think about the business models associated with each of these different use cases, we really need to be clear about understanding what the revenue and value drivers are and what the expense profiles look like, right? Because to your point, traditional home health is a very different business model that has its own unique requirements than acute level care in the home, where you have to orchestrate all of these clinical and ancillary services and bring them to the patient's homes, right? But then you start to see a blurring of the lines, right? Historically, we had these really discrete pieces of the care continuum. Now we're kind of like filling in some of the gaps that existed between those. And there aren't necessarily reimbursement schema that support that interstitial space, right? That's where it'll be interesting to see how the regulators and payers kind of evolve over time with us. But as I've spoke to clinical leaders across the country, they view it as we need to structure the right care models to best take care of our patients, and then we'll let the bean counters figure out how we get paid for it, right?
And I'll say that acute care waiver piece, that is something that our industry, the home healthcare industry, was asking for 20, 30 years ago.
Yep.
And to see COVID come up and see that being developed, that was like, yes, that's what we need. So hopefully that can be pushed, because that will help fund that project.
Yeah, but it's a great question, and it gets very nuanced, so
Well,
thank you.
and I would say, in looking at our operation, so I have a central depot where the O2 concentrators come back, the infusion pumps come back. We're not delivering that stuff to the patient's homes. That's going out through the courier service. And when it comes back, we do the preventative maintenance, we do the repairs on it. But now we're starting to, from an acute standpoint, you start looking at dialysis machines. Those aren't being delivered from the home health facility, but they're being installed by our technicians, being maintained by our technicians. And we do the transfill. We have the O2 tanks. We do the transfill and send those out. And so I think there's different aspects of that when you start looking at the acuity of the patient and the equipment that's being installed. So,
Cherie,
And that's why we had to create this tiered model for based on the acuity of the patient, and the service and what we're doing for them is different depending on where they are in that cycle. And it also depends on the patient cohort, so what you're treating the patient for too. So we have these patient acuity models for different cohorts of patients. And it does get tricky because the reimbursement really isn't where we would want it to be as a healthcare institution, but we're a nonprofit, so as long as we're covering our costs and we're really, thinking through how we can do that, then we would prefer to do the right thing for the patient versus, try to make more money and have them stay in the hospital an extra day. Yeah. So, we're getting ready to publish a couple of different papers on the actual specific results and patient outcomes on what we've found with our patient at home models. So, look forward to those.
At the risk of stepping on some of my fellow panel members' toes, I would also offer, you made a comment about it being more around cost avoidance. And so one piece that I would offer is we increasingly see more organizations take on a population health model for reimbursement. That's actually where that cost avoidance is going to become of critical importance, because the hospitals are absolutely going to see it as a more effective and more cost-efficient way of being able to provide that care.
And we're at capacity, so frankly, if we can move some of the patients into a better setting for them, it's going to help us too, because then we can get sicker patients in the door as well.
Absolutely.
I was just going to ask, it sounds like in some of these cases you have new medical devices, manufacturers are coming along, developing new technologies, and in some cases you're retrofitting existing technology to be used by the patients and the clinicians. And what are you excited about? What do you know that's on the horizon? Are the medical device manufacturers going to come along to be developing their products to be utilized by the patients and their families and be remotely operated by clinicians? And what do you know? How do you feel? How's that coming along?
All right, Mike, I'll give you a first stab, and then I'll go to Diane next.
I'm excited about it. I think, again, I think we've already talked about what we need to do, what's right for the patient. We need to drive down costs that we can for healthcare. We need to help reform healthcare. Patients heal much better in their own home than they do in a hospital setting or an acute setting. And again, I think it's going to take a lot of collaboration between the HTM department, hospital administration, the C-suites, the manufacturers, to ensure that we're putting out there, or we're getting the product out there that's going to be best for the patients and for their families. So I think the manufacturers are more than willing and on board to help with that.
And I think, as I said earlier, I mean, our strategies, our solution strategies are informed by what our user needs are. And so I think as we're getting more engaged in these discussions and partnerships and collaborations across the various stakeholders to understand what are these models going to look like, we look at then and assess what our technology, what our solutions can bring to the table today, and where does it need to go. I mean, I don't know that I can be more specific with that, but, and again, it's about digital enabling, right? Digitally enabling technologies to allow for that data transfer, to allow for that access from the healthcare providers who, just because we're moving those patients to a different health setting doesn't mean they're out of sight, out of mind. It's a continuation of care for those patients. And that's what will be really critical, the technologies and solutions that enable that.
I also see that there's going to be new products. I honestly do. There's going to be new solutions. So one of the things that we're struggling with is the aggregation of all the information from the patient's home in a reliable manner out to the cloud solutions for us to then intake it. And if you can envision, so my vision for CHOP is we have a virtual command center, not just for inside the walls of the hospital, but outside. And so we've got a heat map of patients that we're caring for outside of the institution that may need to be readmitted at any time, depending on what's going on with them. And then we need to fast track them in. Just because we may have released them earlier from the institution. So there's a whole slew of things to think about, but there will be, there will be a demand for a whole set of new technologies.
Just building on that, Tree, it's cool that you mentioned that. I was at the Hospital at Home Leadership Summit a couple of weeks ago in Boston, and there was a lot of conversation around if we're standing up hospital at home programs, they can't live in a silo. This is really a platform to help manage the holistic operation of that technology-enabled care. So one of the coolest types of technology I think are coming out now and will be advanced in the future is ambient listening and monitoring for falls with computer vision. And that has applications in the four walls of the hospital, and it can also have applications at home, right? So I think the next generation of technologies that are about to come out are going to be fascinating.
Thank you.
Hello. I had a quick question about what is the risk to the patient when we do take them out of the home? I know you guys have mentioned about the outpatients, and I sort of want to know, when do we know we're going too far? With all these medical advancements, it's great and it's beneficial to continue to grow. But I do think we sometimes need to look at when do we push this too far, and we're making so many inventions that it's not really helping people, it's starting to hurt them now.
So we measure that. I mean, that's one of the first things that we put into place is actually how we're going to measure the patient's acuity as well as the outcome. And so looking at hospital readmissions and whether after we put the new solutions in place, it's causing more issues than for the patients with respects to care. And there's a number of different things that we look at as success metrics for safe outcomes. And so really making sure that you've got those in place first is critical. And that's why we've also been very specific about which cohorts of patients we're really considering for these things. So we have a program where across the institution, any of our specialties can put their hand up and say, hey, we have a use case. What we then do is our clinical teams will then dive in and actually have a look at the patient safety and other care impacts to that particular patient cohort before we actually select that cohort of patients to then be put in kind of the home environment.
So mindful of time, I'm gonna go ahead and have us go to the next question so that we can try to get to a couple more questions before we break, so I'll go ahead and I'll keep handing them off to individual members of the panel.
Thanks very much. First, I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say that I think that the home health waivers will follow suit with telehealth and probably be extended in some form. But my question, unrelated to that, is a big one, and it probably could be its own topic, but how do we manage the cybersecurity risk of home health? In particular, we're using a lot of cloud-based applications. We're taking those also out of the four walls of the hospital, so to speak. So how are you doing that now, and how do you foresee us managing that in the future? And obviously, it's interdisciplinary.
So Cherie, recognizing your background in cybersecurity, I feel like I'm throwing you a softball with this one. And I know Mike is going to be anxiously wanting to answer part of this as well.
So we have to make sure that we have a cybersecurity program across the institution, and making sure that any of these solutions fit into that cybersecurity program is critical. And so there's many layers and elements, but once you introduce the patient's home and the connection to the patient's home, being very thoughtful as to how that's segmented or how you're thinking about connecting that to your network is absolutely critical. And I'll let you.
Well, and I think it's going to be extremely important going forward is the ability to monitor that.
Yep.
And to really take a look. I mean, from a hospital standpoint, or from an acute care standpoint, now we're utilizing suppliers out there that are passively monitoring the network and gathering data, at least from the medical equipment side, passively gathering that data and information, and really taking a look and saying, hey, we've got some abnormal behavior here, and we think that this is a cybersecurity risk, and we need to take a look at it. And I think from the home setting, it's going to be the same thing. And that's where I'm saying the collaborative effort is going to be, is this an HTM problem? Is this an IT problem? Is this a facility problem? Yes, yes, and yes. So we really need to come together and collaborate on that and really push forward to ensuring that we're providing that. And for the most part, if you look at it, when it comes to the cybersecurity, I mean, people aren't typically out there wanting to hack into networks or into equipment to hurt patients. That's not what their intent is. Sometimes that's collateral damage to them, and they have other, what they're trying to do from a cyber perspective. So I think we need to look at that, and really it's going to be a collaborative effort across the entire spectrum for everybody to handle that situation. There's no easy answer, I don't think, at this point.
No, and it includes manufacturers, right? As we're trying to design into our systems, and we're looking at this new use environment, right? What does that do to our cybersecurity protocols? So again, it is a collaborative effort across all.
I think there's also a clear parallel to be drawn for those of you that started with a BlackBerry and then transitioned from a BlackBerry to an iPhone, and from an iPhone that was on the network, then that was off the network, that had an app to be able to connect into the network. I think there's a clear parallel to be drawn in terms of how we create the segregation and the separation that you're going to see simply replicate itself as we move into.
Barrett, you're dating yourself. Some of the people out there just went, what's a BlackBerry?
It was a small device with a roller wheel and a built-in keyboard. All right.
Hello. So in terms of this being a new program and new responsibilities, what's the staffing model that's been utilized? Is it technology specific? And also, what skill sets are being used to hire these individuals?
Mike, I'm going to toss this one to you.
Certainly. So from our perspective, we've got, like I said, we've got a depot where a lot of the equipment comes back into. Once it goes out to a patient, it comes back in. So O2 concentrators, infusion pumps. So really entry level from that aspect. And actually we use that as a stepping stone within the organization because we've got 170 FTEs throughout the entire system. So those individuals that come into the home health setting, now we've got some that absolutely love the home health setting. And they have no desire to do anything but that, which is great. But we've got others that want to advance into the higher technology. And so we utilize that home health piece for that. And then we have a field operations where we've got people that travel from facility to facility with specialties like dialysis, like ventilators, and they will interact and move into and take care of those devices that are going into the patient's homes. So we do specialize from that aspect.
And we're very similar. We have a separate group that handles the devices at home and everything, and yeah, they operate separately from our main biomed, but then there's, connections between them depending on the devices and that kind of stuff. We've also developed a cybersecurity biomedical program too, so that we now have that as a track for new candidates as well, to answer kind of some of the last question too.
Thank you. Go ahead.
The onset of PL 95292 and 100% reimbursement for the cost of home hemodialysis that was invented way back in the late 70s resulted in a pool of additional equipment. And then it also saw the concentration of that technology among specific providers, DaVita, Fresenius, and the concentration. When I started in dialysis, there was 3 dialysis facilities in all of the state of Kansas. Now there's probably hundreds. How do you see a model like Intermountain and the VA, who have taken this plethora of additional equipment that was a result of both COVID and a Medicare program that was intended to reduce the cost of service, how do you see that molding into both your 2 organizations and the use of third-party service providers like TriMedics and Renovo and Intermed when we have this kind of specialized technology?
Mike, would you like to start?
Yeah, so, in our organization, we have a dialysis team that handles all of our dialysis units, and we have our inpatient dialysis in the acute care settings, which really is a limited number of devices within those facilities for high acuity patients. And then we've got our dialysis centers that we've got located throughout the different states where our patients come in, and they handle that. And now with the home setting as we're going in, and it was interesting because our staff, when we looked at it, they said, "Well, I'm going in and installing this unit in a patient's home, which means when I tap into the water system or I'm cutting into their water lines, what happens if it springs a leak and floods their, whatever room? Who's liable for that now? What's the risk associated with it, as well as our technicians are going in, the clinician may not be on site as the patient's going through the treatment, but our technician walks through the door because there's a problem with the equipment, and all of a sudden they're being asked the questions from the patient or the patient's family on what do we do now? What are the next steps? Or can you help me with how I operate this? And so I think, as we're looking at it from a maintenance standpoint, is it reducing cost from a maintenance standpoint? Probably not. But from the healthcare setting, and I would have to turn to the experts there, from a cost perspective at that point to the patient, is it reducing that cost? And I would think so. And I would think we would get to the point where if we're doing this enough throughout our organizations, that we can start to reduce the footprint of the dialysis centers that we have. So we don't have as many patients coming into that dialysis center requiring transportation or however they're getting there, and the treatment that they receive there, so we can start reducing those footprints and move into the home setting. And I would think that would have a cost impact on that as well.
And I guess I'll answer the question from a slightly different angle, which is, I would say, one is I think we're still learning what that model in terms of the service that's being provided internally versus the service that's being purchased externally. I think that's still under development. The other piece specifically as it relates to the dialysis question is I actually think that there's been a lot of advances in healthcare, specifically some of the recent weight loss medications that are coming to the forefront, where we're actually trying to be able to solve some of the dialysis issues before they ever even become an issue. And so trying to be able to get further along in terms of our preventative care. And I think that will have a trickle-down effect, as will the technology advancement. Both of those are going to play sort of opposite roles in terms of moving us towards what the ultimate position might look like. So it looks like as far as timing goes, it looks like we might have time for 1, maybe 2 more questions. So I'll go ahead and open it up.
Yeah, you alluded a little bit to the question I had with regards to that cost to the patient reduction aspect. There's been a lot on the front end from the hospital healthcare side for reimbursement opportunities with the CMS waiver. There's some Harvard grant opportunities during COVID. Actually being involved with a healthcare system that looked at this model and tried to integrate it. The buy-in from the customer was extremely difficult. You know, they look at that as an ownership of opportunity on their side to try to be the burden of care. How long did it take for you all, and I'm assuming there's a lot of marketing and other aspects that come into this, before you really started seeing that increase in your patient load onto the hospital home side? And then again, do you see there's an opportunity for reduction to the patient costs coming out of this as well?
So Mike and Shuri, I'm going to open this one up to you, but I'm going to intentionally ask for brief responses in hopes that we can get to one more question.
And my staff would tell you I don't have such thing as a brief response.
All right, I'll move to
But anyways, I would say brief response to that is from my standpoint. So I've been with Intermountain Healthcare 13 years, and this program was in place when I joined them 13 years ago. Now it is really taken off and grown. So scalability, it's really expanded, and I think we've been able to reduce the cost, and that's one of our objectives within the organization, is to really reduce the cost to our patient. And if that means that we've got to do something that's going to push our cost a little bit in order to get there, we do that. And so that's my brief answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've had home health too for many, many years. But this particular initiative of really picking cohorts and being very intentional has been the last 2 years. And we started very small with very specific pilots.
Thank you. Final question, go ahead.
This question is for Mike, since he brought this up. You know, with the rapid expansion of AI, I do see robotics coming in. But what I would like to hear from you is, what roles do you think robotics is going to play in this home health?
So, it's interesting to me with the robotics piece, because if you look at it, have you been to any of the casinos or any things like that, and you see the security robots wandering through the parking lots? It's quite impressive. But we've also got hospitals that are using robots now to deliver patient trays and to deliver medications. And these things let themselves on the elevator, they let themselves off, they go to the patient rooms. So from a home setting, I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of robotic usage for medication management. You're going to see it for nutrition. And you could potentially see it from an AI perspective, to where it's interacting with the equipment and being proactive and predictive instead of reactive in those fronts as well.
Can I add one thing, though, that we haven't touched on, and that is equity. And so some of these initiatives are about equity and making sure that maybe patients who couldn't get into us or couldn't do things, and as well as at the home, is really looking at how you improve care equity with some of these initiatives, because you can actually make a dent in that as well. We haven't talked about that too much here, but I wanted to mention it because I felt I'd be remiss in not mentioning that. So that's something else that we're measuring very closely.
Yes. And the amusing piece on that one in particular is we could have hosted an entire 1-hour panel just talking about how home health care could play a role in that equity piece, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, I will go ahead, and for all of you that are fathers in the audience, I want to wish you a very happy Father's Day. Thank you for spending at least a portion of your Father's Day here with us. But please join me in thanking the panelists. And with that, this session will conclude. Please enjoy the rest of the AAMI Exchange.
Please welcome back to the stage AAMI President and CEO, Pamela Aurora.
Thank you, Barrett, Mike, Diane, Cherie, and Ryan, for a really informative discussion. I think we could have been here all day. It's just so interesting. This is an area where HTM can really help drive innovation and quality for the sake of patients everywhere. Please join me again in thanking our panelists. And thank you all for joining this morning. We kind of extended the time for the Q&A. Make it a great day, and we'll see you tonight for the closing reception. The expo hall is now open. Thank you.